this video, we're going to talk about how different scales and different keys relate to one another. So we're talking about key signatures and the circle of fifths. And to demonstrate how this works, I'm going to take a step back from this notation. Our goal is to see two things. First of all, how can we have a more economical way of writing a scale other than C major, other than throwing all these accidentals? But more importantly, how do all of these different scales that we might write, how do they relate to one another? Is there an orderly way that they relate to one another? And in order to see that, getting away from this strangely warped space where some of these are half steps and some of these are whole steps is going to be very helpful. So let's move over to a little visual aid. What we've got here is a simple graphical representation of the major scale. And we've got 4 versions of it all lined up. And you'll notice I've got the note C labeled. So what does that mean? Let's focus on the green one for now. We've got a note, then note, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. We've got the major scale right there, allowing you to see where the half steps are close and where the whole steps are far. I'm just going to label the whole steps there. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, okay? Now, this major scale has a really interesting property, and that is that I can make the smallest possible change. So I've got 7 different notes here in a repeating sequence. I can make the smallest possible change. I'm just going to take one of those notes, and I'm going to move it only one position over to the side. And what's fascinating is that I can keep the same pattern, a different version of the same pattern. Now look how this works. I've got my 2 holes here. I've got my 3 holes here. And I've got a different, up in red. So this is C major. Let me label this. The green we're going to leave where it is. That's C major. But now, 2 holes, 3 holes. If I take the upper note in my half step, and I just move that up by 1, it's the same pattern, you see? Now I've just switched 3 holes, 2 holes. And you can see that it's the same pattern if I just shift my box up. So before my starting point, so right here, this was my starting point on C. Now, 3 holes, well that doesn't start a major scale. The major scale starts at the run of 2 holes. So now this note right here is my starting point. This is the focal point. And where is that? C, D, E, F, F turned into F sharp, G. So this is going to be a G major scale. This note that now starts the pattern. You see, I just moved the one note, and I've got a different version of the same pattern. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay? Now, and again, all I did was I took these notes, which were Fs, and I turned them into F sharps, and I've just shifted the pattern. It's the same pattern, it's just got a shifted starting point. Now, let's think about that. Now, F, that's not a very helpful way of thinking about it. More helpful to say is, what are we doing relative to the scale? So if C is scale degree 1, we're taking 1, 2, 3, 4. We're taking our old scale degree 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and by moving it up by a half step, it now becomes scale degree 7 in a new scale. Tucked right below the tonic, scale degree 7. Used to be 4, now it's 7. Okay? Now let's make that same change right here. Let's take all of our Fs, and turn them into F sharps. So now where I used to have all C major scales, now I've got 2 G major scales up here, okay? But I can do exactly the same thing. Now let's move down an octave. So 1, 2, 3, 4 relative to G major, and I can do exactly the same thing. You see here are 2 holes, followed by 3 holes. So I take the lower note from the run of 3 whole steps, and I move it up by 1. That's the old scale degree 4. gets moved up. So what note is that anyway? Oh, that's my old scale degree 1. That's C. I take C and turn it into C sharp. And that makes the note right above it, we now know, into a new scale degree 1. Just as it's exactly symmetrical. I'm doing the same thing I did before. What used to be scale degree 4 gets raised by a half step. Now it's a scale degree 7. So the note above it is scale degree 1. So now what I'm dealing with is a D major scale. And obviously, I could just keep going and going and going and always do that same thing. But let's look at another facet of this, and that is we've been imagining the pattern as it goes upward. But what about this same relationship from the perspective of the upper scale first? So from that perspective, I take what used to be scale degree 7, and I lower it by a half step, and now it's a scale degree 4. Here in G major, I take what used to be scale degree 7, so where is that? Right, I take what used to be scale degree 7, my F sharp, and I lower it by a half step to an F natural, and now it's a scale degree 4 in a C major scale. Well, I can do exactly the same thing. I can take my old scale degree 7 in C major, and I can lower it by a half step. So what am I doing? I'm doing the same thing. I've got my run here. Let me label them. So I've got 3 holes, and I've got 2 holes, steps, that is to say. So I take the upper note now, instead of taking the bottom note of the run of 3, the bottom note of the run of 3 and putting it up by 1, here's the run of 3. I'm going to take the top note of the run of 3, and I'm going to put it down by 1, and it does the same thing. It just shifts the relative locations of whole and half steps. So now, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So what did I do? I took B and I turned it into B flat. So now again, if this B turning into B flat, if that's now a scale degree 4 in the lower scale, 4, 3, 2, 1, here is my new scale degree 1. Where is that relative to my old scale? Well, here was C. C, well, you can just count backward, count downward. C, B flat, A, G, F. So now we're dealing with an F scale. And I can go as far as I want to in that direction ad infinitum as well. I can just keep going and going. So here's your handout. Just to explain, this is a different way of visualizing the same thing. Here's my C major scale. I've got boxes around the C's with visually represented wholes and halves. I just take the bottom note of that run of 3 whole steps. I shift it from F up to F sharp. So in this line, that peg that used to be on F moves to F sharp. That changes the location of the wholes and halves. So now I've got whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Starting here on G, my center, my tonic, my first note of the scale moved from C to G. And if I go the other way, I take my old scale degree 7, I move it down by a half step, B becomes B flat. Here the B becomes B flat. So I've got a new pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and the tonal center moves from C down to F.